what I'm saying, George, is there are there one or more other breeding, self-sustaining human populations underground, undersea that are, for the most part, compartmentalized from our topside society? This is a question I've been asking myself more and more.
With little children who have never seen the sun, for example,
for whom the stories about the world that's up on the top side would be as much myth for them as their world would be myth for us.
It would. We constantly get calls from people who have seen strange things, Richard, some of which include stories of people being abducted, taken to underground bases. Do you hear these events as well?
Yes, I've read a lot of these stories. I mean, Linda Moulton Howe, for example, who appears regularly on your program, has done a lot of research in this area, and she's collected many of these stories, and other people have too. I know Melinda Leslie, for example, and I believe you've interviewed Melinda before, and she's also done quite a lot of research in this area. Linda is one of these people who's been abducted and taken to underground facilities, and I've discussed this with her personally, face-to-face, and also at great length over the telephone and so forth, and I don't doubt Linda's word, Melinda, and I have to believe that there's a substantial element of factual truth in Linda Moulton Howe's research, and I'm even willing to believe there could be two or more other human societies that hold themselves apart from us underground. The first might be a more recent or more modern one that spun off from our own compartmentalized military-industrial espionage complex over the last 50 or 60 years. And I'm also willing to believe there could be one or more other human civilizations underground and undersea, perhaps from Atlantean times, from previous periods of high civilization on this planet.
Why abduct, though, and bring them down there? Why not ask for volunteers?
Well, maybe there are volunteers who go down, too. The rule may be if you volunteer and you go down, you don't come back up.
You got to stay there for a while. Yeah.
Got to stay. And it also could be that the people who are abducted have, many of them report being implanted, George. Now, if you're implanted, you could, I think, feasibly be eyes and ears for someone else, kind of like a mobile microphone or mobile TV camera. You follow me?
Yeah.
And it's interesting how many abductees who report implants report them either in the area of the ear or frequently up the nose in the vicinity of the optic nerve, suggesting to me that those doing the implanting are essentially turning people loose then to be their eyes and ears in the everyday human society that you and I know.
Vice President Dick Cheney, who has not had a very pleasant last few days because of the accidental shooting of his pal, there have been a lot of people who claim that they've heard explosions in and around or underneath his mansion, his residency in Washington, D.C.
In fact, George, that's true. And I actually spoke with a woman who lives in his neighborhood up there in Northwest D.C. I spoke at the... Are you still there, George?
Yeah.
There was
I heard a click, but I'm
here.
Click
on the phone.
Yeah.
Anyway...
they're probably monitoring you, Richard.
Well, you know, the NSA has been in the news these days, probably monitoring you too, George.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by the way, it is illegal, it is unconstitutional, and it's a sad day in America. It's a Sovietization of our system. You know, I was raised, and I'll say this briefly, parenthetically, and move back to Northwest D.C., but I was raised coming up to the public schools, hearing from my teachers that what distinguished our free system from the Soviets' unfree system was that the Soviet government, those terrible commies, spied on their people, George.
That's absolutely. They monitored everything. Yeah,
you weren't free. You couldn't say what you wanted without the government spying on you and perhaps reeling you in for a little interrogation or a little rest in one of their gulags or a jail cell or something. Well, don't you know, George, that's beginning to happen in our day?
Yep, sure is.
In this country.
Sure is.
I don't know what you'd call it, the communization and Sovietization of the American system. It's not free anymore. But anyway, let's give them an earful. Why not? Let's go to Northwest Washington, D.C. When I spoke at the X conference last year, a woman stopped by my table and said, you know, I heard your remarks, and I live in Cheney's neighborhood. And she regularly walks her dog past the vice presidential mansion, which is on the grounds of the Naval Observatory.
And he's got to have Secret Service all over the place, I guess, right?
Well, around there, yes, but you can still walk the streets.
Sure.
On the sidewalk. And she said, in addition to the explosions, and there were many of them that went on for months, very powerful explosions that shook the whole neighborhood, made people's houses tremble, knocked china off the shelves, and did damage to people's homes. People were upset, but got no resolution from the Navy. The blasting was very conspicuous. She said at one point they put up this huge camouflage netting to shield from view, so passers-by couldn't peer in through the trees and see what was going on. And she said it was the size of, of a two-story barn, this camouflage netting. It was quite large. And then there were many dump trucks going in and out and pieces of heavy equipment.
Well, maybe it was building a bowling alley or something.
No, my bet would be making a substantial deep facility beneath the vice presidential mansion. I would guess probably a high-speed elevator shaft giving access to the tunnels that underlie Washington, D.C.
You mean it's already connected to something, you think?
Already connected.
Sure.
My research indicates there are multiple levels of tunnels beneath Washington, D.C., and not only Washington, D.C., but a lot of other cities, New York, and not only American cities, Moscow, Beijing, London, Paris. It's the reality we live in.
I think, though, it's for the elitists, Richard.
It is for the elite, George. It's not for you and for me, or for most of the people listening to this broadcast. If and when catastrophe happens...
Whatever it is. Could be an asteroid. Could be man-made. Could be anything.
Their intent is to save themselves, and we will be left to fend for our own selves.
On our dollar, by the way.
Well, and they're doing this with our dollar, too, George.
Yep. There's no doubt about that.
What was it Patrick Henry said something? What was that phrase? Taxation without representation? I think 230 years later, it still has a great deal of relevance.
I think they have built... Now, in some cases, I think it's very appropriate to build a facility for government in the event of a war, because you got to keep the system going. That I can understand. But I think it's more than that, Richard.
Far more. And getting back to the Manhattan Project, years ago when I first got into this research, and I went to the National Archives more than once, but I was at the National Archives in College Park in Maryland, and I asked one of the archivists about if they had any material on underground bases. And this guy looked to me and he said, I'll bring you the Manhattan Project files. And I could kick myself now because he was about to bring the mother load to me.
Yeah,
man.
The Holy Grail right there.
And I said, well, actually, I'm not interested in development of the atom bomb at this time. I really want to do underground bases. And he kind of gave me a sidelong glance as if to say, okay, fella, but I was about to respond to your request in a way that you couldn't even imagine.
If you only knew. Richard, stay with us. We'll be back. We'll continue this discussion. We'll also open up the phone lines. And one of the things Richard would like is if you have worked at or still do an underground facility or undersea facility, or have personal knowledge, maybe about a friend, a family member that happens to have worked in one of these facilities, check in with us. I'm George.